to By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Sean Blackmon, here with Jacquie Luqman. And as always, we are your guide for connecting the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. And today we're having another edition of our weekly segment, the Redspin Report, where we discuss sports, politics, and struggle with Nate Wallace, co-host of the Redspin Sports Podcast. Nate, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Sean, how's it going?
Everything's going well, Nate. And, there have been reports that there are at least 6,500 confirmed deaths of migrant laborers in Qatar that seem to happen as a result of building the infrastructure for the 2022 FIFA Men's World Cup. Now, when it comes to the building of infrastructure and other sorts of issues like this around major sporting events, whether it's things like FIFA or the Olympics, it seems like there's always a serious issue of labor exploitation and outright abuse. Also, typically a serious impacts on local populations. But I was hoping that you could begin by sort of breaking down what happened here with these migrant worker deaths, and what do you think it sort of says about the role of infrastructure in sports in this way?
Yeah, it's really just horrifying to be precise about the language. I mean, there's no way around it. I mean, this whole World Cup was mired with corruption from the very start. The bid going to Qatar over 10 years ago now. You have a situation where we've heard about the stories with the Olympics in Brazil, so many of the obsolete stadiums now that are built. Abdul Malik, who was a filmmaker, scriptwriter, and also just a political activist in Canada, was on my show and was talking about how there's, just like you have now Rick Scott, the senator from the state of Florida, former governor, pushing this whole narrative. We talked about this a few weeks ago about the idea of not allowing China to have the Olympics next year, taking that away because of human rights violations. And Abdul Malik makes a good point that these, the Olympics should basically be in one place if they're even going to exist, going maybe Athens, Greece, where they started. And that way we don't have this problem where places are spending huge amounts of resources on stuff like that. Now, this is about FIFA, which is the International Federation for Football, or, soccer as we call it here in the U.S. And this whole case involving the Qatari royal family, involving the people that were, putting this together, has been just disgusting from the start. I mean, the Guardian piece recently fell 6,500, but it really depends a lot on how you count these and how you categorize them. Because when you look at where these people come from, they come from Sri Lanka, they come from Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and India, and the findings, have been compiled by all sorts of independent sources, and this has been something people have been investigating for years now. And it's throughout the process, there's just all these shady deaths. The death toll, they try to say work related versus non-work related. I mean, you've had crazy situations such as the one there when they talk about 37 deaths have been linked directly to the construction of the World Cup stadiums, even though 34 of them they say are like non-work related. I mean, how do you go? I mean, the fact is also they take their passports when they get to Qatar. You have no worker, protections, no kind of like labor law protections whatsoever. It's a country where the U.S. Clearly is aligned with and has no problem doing business with. Qatar has no problem with apartheid Israel and aligning with them, when it suits their interests. It's just it's messed up on so many levels. And when you really hear how many families, a guy like Gal Singh Rai from Nepal was paid, it's like 1,000 euros or whatever in recruitment fees for his job as a cleaner in the camp there for workers building the Education City World Cup Stadium. Then a week he killed himself because of the conditions. He had another worker, Mohammed Shahid Mia, who was electrocuted in his worker accommodation after water came into contact with exposed electrical cables. In India, you have the family of Madhu Bolapali talking about how they've never understood how their 43-year-old relative died of natural causes while working in Qatar. His body was found lying on his dorm room floor. Still looking for answers. The death toll just continues. The numbers, obviously Qatar tries to act like that it's not as big of a deal as it is, but the fundamental problem is labor law practices. And it's funny when the U.S. wants to put sanctions on China over an Adrian Zen's alleged genocide of Uyghurs in Western China that is based purely on a guy who believes the Bible, the biblical book of Revelation, to be literal truth. And this idea of like the apocalypse and all this stuff. And that's the best the empire can do. That's the best the U.S. national security state can do to put out, to make these claims about human rights violations in China. And to make the point, going full circle of like why it started with Rich Scott in this movement. We talked about the Canadian politician also trying to push to take the Olympics away from China, is why are they not making these same calls to take the World Cup away from Qatar in 2022? Oh, I see, it doesn't fit their geopolitical strategic objectives. So I think we see the hypocrisy for all to see. It's laid bare, and it's just, it's disgusting.
And, Nate, this is even after FIFA, and well, not even after, because I don't think the allegations, the charges against FIFA and the widespread corruption and match fixing have really been adjudicated and ended. So FIFA in general just has a serious problem with just the way they do business and corruption. And now they're, embroiled in human rights abuses.
Absolutely. I mean, it's. This has been going on. I mean, just the whole thing with Qatar even receiving this in the first place was directly linked to massive, bribery, and it was even uncovered. It's not even like a secret. It's just that, it's we can't change it now. Sorry, we're too close to the game's actually happening. Not to mention the absurd claims that Qatar made in their bid process, that they had engineers that would be able to create some sort of like outdoor air conditioning systems that would somehow make the temperatures manageable for playing such a high intensity, high level sport. But obviously that was bogus junk science. So they're going to have to move the World Cup to a whole nother part of the year than what it usually is, just to accommodate Qatar and the corrupt FIFA officials that wanted to make this happen, because they got their pockets lined a little bit, and we can't can't go after them too hard, right? They just want to get, everyone just wants to make a living. These wealthy oligarchs essentially in Europe, where most of these people are on FIFA, on their management, that are on the board that make these decisions. Who they are, they're connected to oligarchs. Interest and linked interest. And it's funny why we don't say NATO oligarch linked, interest when we talk about Europe, or we talk about people in the US that are oligarchs. It's only Russian oligarchs. So I always find the hypocrisy around that astounding too. But it's disgusting. There's the human toll of this. It's I think 6,500, who knows if that number is like, even it captures the whole scope of it.
Yeah, and sticking with the theme as the cover up of abuses in sports, and how really profit seems to be what's at the root and what's really motivating a lot of these cover ups to swing around here to the U.S. I mean, when we look at like college sports and the NCAA and how it looks like for March Madness, they're sort of partnering with Uber Eats, and I think there's also been some things that have been revealed about Louisiana State University, LSU, a sports powerhouse, where there's some revelations that back in 2018, some officials basically skirted Title IX issues by keeping sexual misconduct allegations around their athletes in sports in-house. And I feel like both of those are examples of sort of just the incredible profiteering, if we want to call it that happens off of college sports, and just how, that corporate interest is clearly just so present to the point where these major sports programs will, straight up sweep under the rug these issues of sexual misconduct and other things to keep those players on the field and to keep those dollars rolling in for these schools and for these corporations. And, to me, Nate, it just seems like it's really sort of all connected in terms of the broader problem here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at I'll just start with the LSU example and then bring it to the NCAA, March Madness tournaments that are going on. I mean, there was a tweet Jordan Bohannon retweeted, actually, and I just sent to you, and let me make sure that I have the name correct for the player there. But it was essentially looking at the weight rooms and the disparity between the men's and women's weight rooms that were basically set up for the tournament for players to Sedona Price. All right, she's a women's college basketball player, and she made a video exposing what was going on in terms of the NCAA's totally unequal standards from the University of Oregon. And she showed a weight room of what the men's weight room was and then what the women's tournament weight room was, which was just like a joke. And they had basically nothing to use. And this is the same NCAA that talks all the time about equity and Title IX and all this kind of stuff. But, the fact that the men's tournament makes so much more money, I can't imagine that doesn't have something to do with that. Now, going to the LSU thing, this is just astounding. I really wanted to get into this a few weeks ago when it really broke. But you look at what's going on there, from Les Miles, the now fired coach in the University of Kansas football program, who was involved in just some really just gross sexual behavior in terms of tutoring or mentoring young female students. Well, this guy's like in his 50s as a white guy from who's been in a powerful position since was the head coach there since 2007. Was not relieved of his duties until 2016. And he had success early on, not 2005. He won the national championship in 2007. And yet this stuff was covered up by LSU. This stuff was like brushed under the rug. He also made it very clear that he wanted like hot blonde type, girls to be the ones that were doing the recruiting visits for players. He would give female students rides home, touchy feely type stuff. And that was all kind of spread, it was, brushed under the rug. It goes, the USA Today uncover this stuff because LSU had, done so much to try to keep it in house. They're paying literally now an outside firm up to $100,000 or so to review the cases and determine whether any wrongdoing was done. And then the LSU interim president said to USA Today that he really wasn't aware of the university's problems handling sexual misconduct. And then you go on, it continues to go on where it's just like this, the November 2018 Title IX report that USA Today finally had to sue to be able to get. And it shows that, the deputy athletic director, Verge Asbury, and the football recruiting director, Sharon Lewis, admitted that their practice was to steer allegations against athletes to one person within the program named Miriam Seeger, an associate athletic director, instead of reporting them directly to Title IX, as LSU policy requires. So, Asbury also told the investigator that when a female student came to him, this was the athletic director, the interim athletic director at the time, because she had been abused by football player Drake Davis, he told her he didn't want to hear anymore, quote unquote, and to talk instead to Seeger, Miriam Seeger, that is, who I just mentioned, who's acknowledged never returning the students' calls. So it's like where you have nowhere to turn. You've been forgotten. You're trying to reach out for help. So many young survivors have such a hard time even crossing that bridge and going to seek out and report something, and then only to have that, kind of response. It's just disheartening, to say the least. And then you think of Les Miles and then how he was even able to go on and get another head coaching job. Speaks to the systemic problems, not to mention their own basketball program, and that's a whole other issue. But with the NCAA tournament going on now, I mean, we talked last week about the Rocket Mortgage sponsorship. We talked about the sports media industrial complex figures now that are out there just actively just doing PR work for the NCAA, and the idea of amateurism, and because they see it's under attack. And the idea that the Supreme Court and the Alston case that's coming up and the implications that has for amateurism and the name, image, and likeness discussion. I mean, it's just absurd. We have a situation where any other student that's an art student, music student, any of the university can, have an account, can make money off of like the stuff they're doing that can on their own. Could, if we want to contract with a business to have, or maybe a club wants to have a party or something and use their image or something like that for a poster or promo, they could get paid for that. The NCAA is even fighting that. And it's leading to, I think, a really large, not just movement, but I mean, growing consciousness amongst young people, men and women athletes, about what this really is and how they're using these big revenue sports of men's basketball and football to, essentially prop up and hold up an institution that is, it needs to go.
Yeah, especially when we're talking about, Title IX protections being so hard fought for women in sports and college athletics and education, and the fact that there are so many women on the faculty who are influenced by the influence of capitalism and politics, where they're complicit in covering up these issues, or just not doing anything about them, basically to keep their paychecks too. And it really is a disheartening situation, especially when you look at the amount of money, Nate, that we are talking about, where in March Madness itself isn't like the biggest sports television deal, but it's the most profitable in the postseason. And I mean, this is not like chump change we're talking about with college basketball in particular. How much money are we talking about in regard to the money that's made in the postseason alone for March Madness?
Right. So it used to be that CBS had the sole rights to broadcast the whole tournament. But, people got frustrated. They'd have to be bouncing back and forth between games. So now they tied in CBS and Turner Sports. And you see that they take the Inside the NBA crew from TNT of Ernie Johnson, Kenny Smith, and Charles Barkley and bring them over to do the NCAA tournament. And again, they're not talking about the women's tournament, which is kind of on ESPN as an afterthought, which in terms of like the way the mainstream media covers it. And of course, they'll just say, oh, we're just responding to consumer demand. So I'm not trying to ignore the women's tournament. We're talking about where the money's going, following the money, and what's propping up the NCAA. And it's clearly the men's basketball stuff, because with Division I football, it's essentially the NCAA regulates it, like rules, but the own conferences have a lot more power. And it's like a private corporation, essentially, the college football playoff and these bowl games. So that's the NCAA doesn't get anything that, they don't make money to the level they do with March Madness and NCAA basketball, with football even. And it literally, as you pointed out, it is the biggest sports television deal. It isn't the biggest one, but it is the most profitable because it doesn't involve having to pay labor costs, except for the people that are covering the games. You also have an agreement, you think about CBS and Turner Broadcasting. The NCAA is bringing in $771 million a year. And then the new extension has upped that now to $1.1 billion per year. And then according to Cantor Media, the 2017 tournament generated, close to $1.3 billion, $1.285 billion in ad revenue, right? And then producing a fat profit for CBS and Turner. And that's even when you include their production costs. I mean, so this is, and that continues to rise, right? So they want to make up for their lost, their last lost profits from last year. They had insurance that actually helped cover that too. But you're talking, we're in the billions, all right? And like to think about that level of money that's going, and you're talking about advertisers, right? People are like, they think that this is the way to get eyeballs on my product. And you're going to have what we're about to start today, tipping off at 12:15. The games commence, and you're going to have people all across America, in their little office cubicles or sitting at home or whatever they're doing, or watching on their phones, flipping around, watching games, having a boss button. They actually literally have something called a boss button on the app, the March Madness app, so that if your boss is coming to observe you or something, or watching you, and you want to make sure that you're not caught, not doing work, you can hit your boss button and it pulls up some bogus spreadsheet. It makes it look like you're looking at. So that's how culturally ingrained this is in our society, not to mention the whole practice of filling out brackets and office pools and all the money that's made on gambling. And yet we have people like Jordan Bohannon, the point guard at Iowa, who's been so outspoken this last year and continues to be. And he retweeted the story about the inequity of the women's weight room versus the men's. And he is just being attacked left and right by people like Doug Gottlieb, who's just a complete fraud. The guy was, kicked out of Notre Dame for his own, indiscretions, we'll put it that way, back when he was playing. And then now he spends all his time, talking about going after people that are actually trying to change things, pointing out how they don't understand the value you're being given. Yeah, it comes with rules to be a player. They're helping promote your brand and giving you visibility. So, you can, and it's just every apologist type thing you can imagine. At the end of the day, it's exploitation. It's like the idea that you got to kind of pay your dues. You got to come up. You have a system where, people striving to get to the NBA. we all know that most of them aren't going to go play professionally. So then what kind of education are they getting, right? And the reality is you can't even take half the classes your school's offered. Let's not talk about another issue, which is they're going to be, if you make it to the Final Four, you will have been away from your school living in a bubble in Indianapolis for the better part of a month. Right. And like that is the situation that is it's going on right now while people play in front of empty arenas and this made for TV event that's bringing in billions of dollars for the NCAA. And, but all that's supposedly just all about hoping to promote student athletes and, holistic development of human beings. Right. And the higher ideals of the higher education and academia. It couldn't be more of a sham. And it's, I think the pandemic, like so many things, has, just really, given us a new lens to look at it through and really see it on a level that we haven't seen it before, because now their movement is being monitored so much. They're being, sequestered. They're being made to feel like if you test positive or something goes wrong, you could be the one that let your team down after everybody having to go through this whole ordeal, essentially, of a season. To keep the ball rolling. And so that's where we are right now. And I think we really need to focus on March 31st as a big date, because that Supreme Court ruling could be really transformative. And also it could be something that, regardless of which way it goes, is a catalyst, I feel like, for the next wave of activism and organizing that's going to go on. If we win the image and likeness, I think it'll just mean that that's not the end game. I mean, that's something that should just be common sense. And if it's a loss, then it really, is going to make people pause and say, and understand how broke the system really is on so many levels, and the need for really radical political organizing to help transform and change, just a Morbid system.
Yeah, I think that's the case. And you raise a really interesting point when you talk about the level of surveillance and pressure that's on these athletes, and how one can feel like if a season is thrown off or if their team is unable to perform, then, they could feel that the weight of that is on them. It's just at so many levels that all of this is happening to a group of people who are not able to profit off of their image and likeness. And as such, I tend to agree that will be a very noteworthy struggle moving forward. But we thank you so much, Nate, for joining us today. We're going to leave it there. We'll move to a break here on By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C., but we will be back. So please stay with us.
By any means necessary.